Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about investors' engagement. My name is Leila. I work as an investment manager at Birchal. If you haven't heard of Birchal yet, we help founders to tell stories, build communities, and raise capital. We are Australia's largest CSF platform with now over 70% of market share. And we already helped over 200 companies to successfully raise capital so far, with a few more closing tomorrow. So keep an eye on this channel. We truly believe that people that choose us is not just for the capital. So the aim of this webinar is to learn how can you better engage your hundreds, if not thousands of investors that you have on your cap table after this type of raise. If you haven't raised a Birchal yet, you can also use these strategies to engage with your angel investors, VCs, family offices, or even people that use your platform. We are very lucky to have Paz Pisarski here today, the founder of the Community Collective, and personally, my go-to to anything community related. Hi, Paz.
Hey, Lay, so excited to be here and thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. The floor is all yours, but I'd love for you to start giving an introduction of yourself.
Amazing, definitely can do. And welcome everyone. It's so awesome to have you here live, or if you're tuning in from the future and watching the recording, welcome. As Lay said, my name is Paz Pisarski. I'm one of the co-founders of the Community Collective. And today we are speaking about everything community building. This topic is around beyond the campaign to really mastering investor engagement. And this is basically possible through various community building tactics. So today we're going to jump into lots of different takeaways, some really practical insights. I'm going to give a lot of case studies from communities and a lot of Australian businesses as well. And so I'm just really pumped to be here. So before we kick off, I also just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I'm tuning in from. So I'm based in Torres in regional Victoria, down the Surf Coast, and would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and also the land in which you're tuning in from today as well, wherever that may be. And wherever you may be, you would probably also want to know the agenda of how today is going to work. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with a check-in. We'd love for you to post any answers in the chat for anything like that. And then we're going to unpack exactly what is the difference between an audience and a community. Let's get some definitions down, make sure we're all on the same page and really understand exactly what we're speaking about. And then I'll give you a roadmap about how to actually build an impactful community and really tie that back to building good, strong relationships with your investors, whether you've just raised on Birchal, you've just raised a seed round, any type of investment journey that you're on. It's really key to actually understand how to deepen those relationships when people have just financially invested in your company and to really maximize those efforts. Then we're going to dive into some actual concrete examples of tactics that you can use from the community building world, whether it's for your investors or perhaps you are running a business that also is building a community. So that will be very helpful. And then we'll close, celebrate, have a dance party, and just wrap up from there. So before we jump in, I would love to hear, if you're here live, please open up the chat. Today you can post some questions in there, or you have the Q&A function as well in this session to ask any questions, and we will have time for audience Q&A directly afterwards. But what I would love to hear from anyone who here is live is basically to post in the chat to understand, what do you hope to get out of today? It's really kind of key to understand exactly what you are thinking about and basically tailor any type of content. So please, if you're live, feel free to post in the chat anything that you're looking to learn about, whether it's actually understand how to engage investors in a creative way that isn't just a monthly update after you've raised. Perhaps you don't even have a monthly update that you share with your investors and you'd like to understand formats in that sense, and really understanding, how do you actually leverage tactics such as community building to help your business, but also the relationships that you have around you? So we've got an answer here in the chat of understanding brand awareness through community, which is such a key one, because really community building is about leveraging the relationships that you have at scale, around yourself as a founder, around your brand and business, around your investors. And so as a result, the more people that know about you, the more brand awareness that you may have. So we'll keep following on today as well, and basically hear from some of the other elements. Oh, we've got another answer here. Angel investors engagement after a seed round. For sure, we can definitely go into that as well. And as well, if there's anything else that comes up, feel free to pop them into the chat. So you're in the right place to learn about all those elements. And before we dive in, I also just want to give a bit of a background as to why the hell am I up here speaking about community building? Well, for a bit about me, if this is the first time we're connecting, for the past 7 years, I've been at the intersection of building communities and then helping businesses launch startups or basically grow scale ups. And so during my time, I was based in Melbourne for a couple of years. I worked at Sister Works, which is a not-for-profit that supports asylum seeker women to start their own business. So this was an in-person community. We connected these women who migrated from Latin America or Afghanistan, who basically arrived in Australia. Their qualifications were deemed irrelevant, and we wanted to help them start their own business. So we connected them in a community in Richmond and allowed them to become financially independent and to support their family and create a new life in this country. So that was the first taste I had around, oh, wow, entrepreneurship is really powerful, and also community building can change someone's life. I also joined RMIT Activator after that, and I was with them for about 3 years running accelerator programs. We built a 3-story co-working space, and I helped grow their community from 500 to over 5,000 members, and basically helped their student, staff, and alumni start new businesses or spin out new ideas for the university itself in Melbourne. After that, I joined the Startup Network, which is one of Australia's largest startup communities. At the time, I was working with Judy Anderson Firth, who's also a part of the Birchal team on the board, and also Poppy Trella, who now works at Paloma Ventures. And at the time, we were helping founders launch businesses in Victoria, across Australia. There's over 60,000 people in the Startup Network. And I was the community manager there, basically running and leading their memberships and running a lot of events. And as well, after that, I moved to Torquay, a small surf town down in regional Victoria, and I joined a co-working space called Happy Spaces, which is where I'm tuning in from now, and also helped them basically scale the existing community that they had in person. So I helped them automate over 9 hours of manual admin work every month, just made that disappear. And also understood how can we leverage community building to allow members of this co-working space to not only renew their membership, but invite other people to join this space, and also just to build new connections in the local town as well. So I've been in the world of startups and community building for a long time. I'm also now a founder myself. But along that way, I've also been really passionate about helping other people build communities. And this is really how the Community Collective started. During the time at the Startup Network, myself and our 2 co-founders, Melia Rayner, who was at Blackbird Ventures at the time, running their comms in the community, and also Jala Alex, who was at Monash University, the Generator at the time, but has joined Thriday as their head of people. And the 3 of us had observed that people in Melbourne who were building startup communities found this really difficult. Obviously, so many people were having issues and challenges during the pandemic. I was in Melbourne, one of the most locked down cities in the world, and we were suddenly trying to build communities online for founders whose businesses were either blowing up or shutting shop. I did over 300 courtesy calls to founders at this time and got connected with over 50 different community managers who were managing accelerators, incubators, VCs, university programs, supporting startups, and it was really tough. And so we decided to support each other. We brought together 17 people at the Commons in Cremorne. This is where that photo was taken. That is Emma, who is standing up there. It's Gaz from Tractor Ventures, Ren Butler as well. And we basically created our own support network. And what we did not realize is that this would go viral. We had hundreds of community builders signing up to our Airtable registration link. And this is how we accidentally started a business that went viral, because we really struck a chord with a niche group of people who really needed our support. These are all shots from the monthly meetups that we ran just basically once a month. And we ran this for about a year. And basically it got to July 2022 when we had over 400 members in this free meetup community who were building startup communities in Australia and New Zealand. It was wild. There was so much demand for resources, coaching, support. What are the frameworks? What are the tactics to build communities? How can we go deeper on this outside of a meetup that is 1 hour a month? And so that is how the Community Collective began. That is how I accidentally became a founder. I decided to quit my job and registered the Community Collective as a company. Melia and Jala joined the advisory board and stepped out of operations and were the first people to become our advisors. And I was the first employee as the Community Collective. So registered as a Pty Ltd company. And we've now been operating in that format for about 18 months. And we've since just hired our 5th team member, generated over 6 figures in revenue through a community-led approach. It's a bootstrapped business, became profitable in 3 months, and it is wild to see how this has grown, not just as a business, but as a movement. So everything that I have learned in the journey that I just explained, I would now love to share with you the tactics, how I have learned and observed other people build strong networks, not only with their investors, but with people around them. Because the first taste of community that I had was actually when I was 4 years old. This is me playing guitar. And I've been playing Suzuki classical guitar for over 20 years and have a community of thousands of musicians all around the world, which really shows not only the impact that communities can have over language barriers and countries, but really how profound all of this type of work is. Because the community industry is odd and it's complicated and it's hard to understand. And so let's get clear on some really key definitions and terms to understand what is community and what does that look like in the context of understanding how to build a really strong relationship and network with your investors, especially post-raise. So let's get some definitions on the table to understand the difference between an audience and a community, because every business should have an audience, but not every business needs a community. But you can really think about this in, are you treating your investors like an audience or are you treating them like a community? And both will have very different outcomes. So what is an audience? An audience is a group of people who consume a brand's content. They are advocates, but it is a one-to-many communication style. So this means that it is a passive involvement from those who are inside this audience. So it's a one-to-many communication style. So for example, it could be a business sending a newsletter. It could be a founder emailing their investors once a month with an update on the last quarter metrics. It could, there's usually a minimal sense of belonging. You know, if I subscribe to a newsletter, I don't get access to other subscribers. That would be a very highly big breach of data sharing. And so, you know, this really is a space where people consume the content. This could look like social media followers in the essence of a founder to investor relationship. This basically is a passive way of communicating with them. And there's no way for these audience members to connect with each other. They basically just have a relationship like this triangular model. So when does it become a community? It's when it has an active involvement and members or investors have an ability to connect with one another. It's a many-to-many communication style. By definition, a community is a group of people who are connected by a shared sense of purpose and support each other on a regular basis. On a regular basis is a really key element in that definition, because you're really actually connecting these people on a cadence that happens regularly. You know, there's a strong sense of belonging. Members are actually actively supporting and contributing to each other. And this could be in the form of perhaps there's an online forum, you're in a Slack group together. Perhaps this is a regular meetup. You know, the meetups at the Community Collective happened 1 hour for once a month for over a year. That was a form of community. And once you get really technical and take this community to a whole nother level, you soon reach a mature community. which basically is the snowflake model. Ben Davies, who's one of the advisors at the Community Collective, has really helped us unpack what a mature community looks like. And this is when it is a multi-platform type of community. There's multiple groups, there's sub-communities forming within your community. And basically this is how movements, this is how cults begin. We're not preaching cults here, the ones that discriminate against human rights, but more so the qualities of cults when they build this loyal following. And that is what we're trying to do with the relationship that you have as a founder with your investors. And so, you know, really understanding the difference here is to understand that to build an audience, you're helping people. You know, to build an audience, you're connecting with your investors, you're updating your investors. But to build a community is when you flip the switch and you help people help each other. To build a community with your investors, you're allowing your investors to not only help you as a founder, but also to help each other. And you might think, why would my investors want to help each other? But there's a profound impact that happens when you bring a group of people who are connected by a shared sense of purpose on a regular basis to actually support you and other people involved. You'd actually be quite surprised as to how many people and investors actually want to help and how far they will go. And this quote is from David Spinks, who's one of the founders of CMX, which is the world's largest community of community professionals, over 30,000 community professionals over there, founded in America. So let's look at a couple of examples. I'm going to give you an example of an audience in a community in a business context if you are launching one for your members, and then also one of what it looks like from the founder investor perspective as well. So Broadsheet, if you've ever heard of Broadsheet, you know, just raise your physical hand. They are a media publication in Australia. They share the best hospitality, music, art, performance type recommendations in major capital cities, in major day trip locations. And they've been around for about over 15 years and have built the most incredible audience. And so they have an insanely active, loyal audience in which they buy their newspapers, they understand what is happening online, they read their blogs, they read the newsletter, they're following their social media account. They have a really strong audience. But when Broadsheet flipped the switch and built a community is when they launched Broadsheet Access. This is their monthly membership where you can basically join Broadsheet Access to basically get an inside scoop into some of the best restaurants. You can connect with other Broadsheet Access members and go to restaurants together. You can get the bookings at venues that are booked out for years and years, but they have reserved seating for Broadsheet Access members. You'll hear about where other people are wining and dining. Perhaps you've just moved to a new city and you want to connect with people in your local area. Broadsheet Access would help you do that. So they have turned a part of their audience into an active community who now connect on a regular basis across major cities in Australia through this community model. So how is this relevant if you're a founder building an investor relationship? Well, let's give some examples from that perspective. So for myself, as I mentioned before, the Community Collective is a bootstrapped company. We've never taken external investment, but what we have done is we have an advisory board. So we have 5 members that sit on our advisory board. And at the start, when we had this advisory board, I would send them a GBU update, which stands for good, bad, ugly update. And this is a format that basically shares to our advisory board, the 5 members, the vision, the mission of the business, and the golden metrics for Q3 and Q4. And then we would basically traffic light system those. I'd go, you know what? Our meetup acquisition is totally off track. We're aiming for 20 members a month and we only hit 15 in September. So I'm giving our investors, our board of advisors, a really great, solid monthly update in their inbox. I also publish this as an article on the Community Collective website if anyone wants to read it, to understand, oh, what is the Community Collective doing? How's that going as a business? What are they trying to achieve? How can I help them? And, you know, I did this for all of 2023, all of 2022, and basically built a really great audience, passive involvement with my advisors. I would have one-on-one with my advisors. But what I realized is, wow, there is so much more that I could do by having an advisory board to not only connect them, but to actually allow them to provide deeper support. So flipping the switch and making that a community, I reached out to our advisors. I said, you know what? I know we all have feedback on this strategy, but do you want to jump on a co-creation strategy workshop all together on a regular basis, maybe a couple times a year, maybe once a quarter, and actually all get together in the one room? And you know what happened? We got together and the energy was insane. They all connected for the first time. Our advisors had input on not only what each other's perspectives were, but they helped me as the founder then align on our strategy. They gave me ideas that I'd never even thought about. They actually worded our mission better than we had ever stated before, which is now the current vision and mission that we have. And we fully teared apart the metrics that we had for Q1 and Q3 in a live session. And then after that, I sent a form to them and said, hey, that was a really awesome session. What did you think about it? Would you want to do this on a regular basis? Vote here. We can do it monthly, quarterly, biannually, or once a year at the start of every year. They all came back saying that they want to do this quarterly. You know, I was like, maybe we'll just do it, once a year in January. I don't want to bother them. They're busy people, and they want to catch up every quarter. And that just blew me away. And so I share this model because if you have a monthly investor update that you send, maybe your investors would actually want to jump on a call, meet each other, support you more deeply in that sense. And if they don't, well, that's fine. We respect their calendars, we respect their privacy and their contributions. But this is a way to actually double down on building this really strong network, because as a founder, you can have an audience model where you send investor updates on a passive monthly basis. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that is the bare minimum. You should definitely be doing that as a founder, no matter what. So if you're not doing this, adopt this. There's some great templates online for investor updates as well. But when you create a community model with your investor network is when you allow a space to connect each other. So I'm not saying just launch a Slack community and put all your investors in there, reach out to them individually and saying, I'm thinking about building something really tactical of connecting us on a regular basis to actually go deeper into this company. These people have put their money where their mouth is. These investors have invested in your business. They clearly want to see you succeed. So reaching out to them in a one-on-one email and sharing, you know what, I'm thinking about how we could go deeper. I'm workshopping some ideas. What do you think? Then your role is to listen, ask great questions to them, and then respond and understand what might be the best. Creating a Slack channel with your investors might be an awful idea. Or actually, maybe that's exactly what they want, and that's the perfect way of async communication so that you are listening and responding. You're not creating the idea and then shoving it down your investors' throats. You're really thinking about what would be beneficial here for everyone involved, because there's nothing worse than being invited or roped into something that someone did not ask for in that sense.
Paz, just adding to that, if I can.
Please.
We see this all the time. People invest in early stage businesses because they want to be there for the run. So we're going to see actually results on your investment, return on your investments after 7 to 10 years. What can you do in the meantime to keep them, excited about the offer? And this is a great way of getting there.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Lay. I think it's such an important element to emphasize. And, a lot of people also wonder, how does a community grow and where do you start? And so I want to take you through the community life cycle model. If you haven't heard of this framework, it's basically a framework that explains the different stages of building a community. So whether you're building a community for your business with members and turning your audience into a community, or whether you are really trying to think about how can you actually turn your investor audience into an engaged network, this is the life cycle that it could go through. So every community starts at the seed stage, where basically it starts with one. You are probably the advocate. You are the seed. And ideally, you are going to blossom and nurture this seed to see if it will grow. And the seed stage is basically where you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. You are reaching out to people one-on-one, gaining advice, understanding how you could build this together, and then you're responding. Because how boring would a community or a network be if there was no one in it? It just wouldn't exist. So to understand if the demand is there to actually build this community, you would then need to have other people who are invested and want to be a part of it. So that's when you'd enter the growth stage. The growth stage means that there are other branches, there are other blooming elements of this community. There are other members involved. They've said, yes, you know what, Paz, I want to be a part of the community collective. Keep me updated. I want a regular meetup once a month. Here's my email. Let me know how you go. Amazing. Okay, cool. I actually have 50 of those people who I reached out one-on-one, and they are all keen to be a part of what we're building. Cool. Great. Now it's growth stage. I'm still doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, but at least there are members in this community, and I know that this is somewhere that we can go and pursue. And a lot of people stay at this growth stage. They stay at just 50 people, and they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but there are interactions, which is totally fine. But if your community ever ends up at the maturity phase, which not all communities will, some actually die after the growth stage, some never make it to the growth stage because there was no demand. And we can unpack those elements about understanding how to know if you should build a community. But once you reach maturity, it's where there's a strong foundation. You've basically put down the roots, and now the members are taking it to the next level. They are doing a lot of the active contribution. They're sharing ideas. Your investors are reaching out to other investors. They're making intros for you. There's just so much activity happening without you doing the heavy lifting. And if you are lucky enough to ever have a community that you manage reach pollination, just high five, you know? While I share this, we're all going to roll our shoulders back, because pollination is an element of understanding exactly what the different subgroups of your community are experiencing. So for example, if there was a community that connected musicians, it's pretty broad, you know, musicians, they could be playing guitar, flute, violin, they're all in the one community. But once that community reaches the pollination stage is when subgroups start to form within that community. So you might have 10 people who all play guitar, and they go, you know what, I'm going to start my own little community and network over here. Actually, you know, I play piano, and I want to start my own little community in the musicians, our network. So you're really now seeing subgroups, chapters start to form. You know, Culture Amp are a great example of this, where they built their People Geek community and basically understood that, wow, we have chapter hosts across multiple hundreds of countries that now want to catch up without us. And so they then gave their members the playbooks to run meetups in their own states. And that's when pollination starts to form. When new seeds start to form, new advocates in your community go, you know what, I need to start a subgroup within this main community.
Have you heard of the Notions community as well, Paz?
Yes, I know Francisco, who's the head of Notion, head of community at Notion. We connected in San Francisco, and what they've done is phenomenal.
Would you say that they're in this pollination phase?
100%. Yeah, they have advocates at Notion. They met someone in a small town in America who reached out to them and said, I want to run a meetup for Notion. I have all these fans here. Can we do it? Notion said, all right. They sent, I think like they gave them maybe a couple $100 as budget to buy some swag for Notion.
Yeah.
They had 1,000 people rock up at this small town in America for a Notion meetup that they then understood, wow, we didn't even know we had a fan base or a customer base or an audience base in that town that this one advocate helped them do. So they had multiple sub-communities forming without Notion actively organizing it themselves.
That's really cool to know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. And so, you know, thinking about like, what are some of the benefits around this element? You know, how would your business actually benefit from having an engaged investor community? Well, the benefits from turning your investor network just from this passive audience relationship into an engaged network, you'll really start to see various benefits play out. You know, retention. Your investors might stay along the journey for you longer. They might share new ideas. If they are connecting with each other, they might feel inspired in that sense. Feedback is such an incredible element in which, you know, they might have noticed something out in the market to basically share that with you. If you have a really strong investor network, you've kept them engaged, they're engaging with yourself and the brand, they might be your biggest advocates in that sense. Impact, they might be able to reach people that you wouldn't have even reached without them. And understanding, you know, that element of referrals. Some of my advisors have introduced me to people that have later then become customers, they've become team members, new partners, new recruitment packages, and elements of this generates new revenue for the business itself. And of course, there's plenty of content ideas, photos, elements that you can share across your socials to not only include your investors on this journey, but also include everyone else who might be following along. And so, we're about halfway here. So if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A chat, but really thinking about the how. So a lot of this is really big thinking. And so I want to get really practical and understand exactly how you would understand to build a community. And we can do that through the community compass. So building an engaged community with your members or your investors is really about understanding what are the needs of your business? What are you trying to achieve? That is our number one priority. You have revenue goals, you have metrics that you are trying to achieve. And so really getting clear on that as a founder is the first step. And then you want to understand, okay, well, if I am building a community, like what are your members trying to achieve? What are they actually what are their goals? And what would be beneficial for them in that sense? And finding that overlap and that sweet spot in the middle is where the magic happens. And we can substitute members out for investors in this element. So what are your investors trying to achieve? Obviously, they want to see you achieve as a bit like you have similar goals. And so that is where the magic happens. So finding a sweet spot and building an engaged network in that particular space and getting on the same page of what the business needs and what the investors are trying to achieve is where the magic happens. Because every journey starts with a single step. You can't just go out and just launch a new community from scratch and expect it to be the pollination stage and really successful. It does take time, it takes work, and really unpacking the how will help you get there. So understanding exactly what this might look like. So you might be convinced, you're like, cool, I have been using my investors as an audience. I'm keen to build a network. I understand the stage I'm at right now. I'm at the seed stage. And to find the magic in the middle, I need to understand the audience, what the investors want and what my business is trying to achieve. And now we can lock in the how. So this is where we get really practical, because understanding what this journey looks like to basically move communities through the seed to the growth to the maturity to the pollination stage is understanding the commitment curve. So this is by Douglas Atkin, and basically it understands, okay, what is the commitment on the left and then the time on the bottom to really understand, well, there has to be an initiation element. People will be passive in joining this community or being an engaged investor in your network. And at that point, you might move them up to be really active. They might be contributing, sharing feedback, referrals, and they might even have elements of moving up towards the power, which is where perhaps they join the advisory board. They become a bigger contributor in the business in that sense. And so a lot of you are probably at that element of the passive and active element. If you're in the passive stage, your investors definitely are just this audience where you're connecting and sharing updates on. And at that point, they could drop off. If you don't engage them adequately, they could become inactive in that sense, and perhaps they might not become your biggest advocates. And not all investors need to become your biggest advocate and join a community and shout from the rooftops. That we need to align on expectations and become quite realistic here. But there will be certain people in your investor network who do want to go that extra mile. I was listening to a podcast from Tim Ferriss, and he wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. And when he invested in some of the early companies, he basically wanted to go above and beyond and connect the founders, help them share feedback. So he was one of the most active and engaged investors, and they adequately built a network around him and went on to recommend not only him as an investor to other companies, but he also joined many different boards as well in that front. So if you play your cards right, you could actually allow your investors to show you the contribution they would like to make, but also benefit from that as well. So how the hell do you move people up the commitment curve? How do we go from a passive involvement to an active involvement? Well, there's a really fantastic model called the Pirate Metrics, which is also very tangible and relatable for also running a business. But it's called the R, so the AARR Pirate Metrics. So it's like big pirates here, you know. But understanding this type of model is where you can move your investors through that commitment curve to go from passive to active and ideally power. So really thinking about this awareness stage. So first up, you know, obviously your investors need to be aware about you. You've probably nailed that if they've invested in your company. And then understanding, okay, cool, well, the acquisition stage. We need to make sure that they actually become an investor. So say they've invested in, maybe you've just signed up to Birchal, you've launched your campaign, you have some investors and you've acquired them. Now it is time for the activation. This is where the community building tactics come into place to understand how to move people up that commitment curve and go from that passive to active involvement. And the activation is really about, okay, how do I understand what the investor is trying to achieve, how they would like to help me, and what would be the most beneficial support or avenues in which to communicate with them. And so once you've reached that kind of activation stage, you've done that well, your investors might be retained for a long amount of time. They might stay with you on this journey, 7 to 10 years it could be. My advisors have been with me since Melia and Jala since day one, since 2021, and Kim and Ben since 2022. That's years that they have been on this journey with me. Once they've been retained and basically activated and nurtured in that sense, they might end up sharing referrals, and then that might generate more revenue and impact, as we mentioned. And then they might reinvest in the business, not just with their money, but they might actually then understand, okay, how else can we help you? Maybe you're raising another round and they might bring in more people that can help and contribute. And so this is really an element to understand, okay, how can I move people through that element? And I'd encourage you just to take a moment and reflect. You know, where are your investors or members on this map right now? Are you at the awareness stage? Are you at the acquisition stage? Perhaps you've nailed this, you're at the revenue stage. You know, if you're here live, feel free to post in the chat where you think you are right now. If you're at home watching, you know, just pause this video, grab a piece of paper and start just noting down, okay, where am I on this journey right now? You know, we have someone here live who's at the referral stage. Love that. You should jump up and run the rest of this webinar. We should all learn from you of what you're doing. But that is phenomenal, you know, really
Yes,
understanding.
I can actually share something on this that is very fresh. We launched today and was, I'm going to use Birchal as an example. Birchal has around 1,500 shareholders, and today we started a community called the Birchal Crew. Our idea is to kind of get investors engaged in our mission, helping meaningful ways, including referral companies like you just mentioned, and kind of collaborating in internal projects as well. And we see this as a massive opportunity to educate the entire industry at scale about CSF. It's a very new industry in Australia. We've been here for 5 years. So they're going to be helping us with this education piece. And if our team is already doing a good job at that, imagine, you know, engaging these 1,000 investors to help us out.
I love that. The Birchal Crew. What an
Birchal.
awesome initiative. Okay, thanks for sharing, Leah. I love that. Fun. Well, the last section of this element before we pause for any questions is really about the tactics. So getting really granular of, okay, what are some tangible case studies? What have Australian businesses done? What have companies around the world done to not only build an engaged community, but also build that engaged investor network? So a lot of these examples that I will share, we have 8 tactics to unpack with 8 different examples and just one for each. And basically we'll understand what have companies done to successfully build communities for either their customers or their audiences, not necessarily for investors, but some of these case studies will inspire you about how you can apply that to your own investor network. So understanding one of the best community tactics of all time that I've witnessed is called co-creation. This is actually allowing members of your community, allowing investors in your network to actually have an input on the decisions made within the business. So an example of co-creation done well is from Butter. So Butter is an online tool used to create and host engaging online sessions similar to Zoom, but they have more functionalities of interactivity. And so what Butter did is they hired a head of community, Anna Maria, who's based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. They said to her, we'd love to build a community for our business and understand how we can go deeper on supporting our customers and people who facilitate live sessions. So Anna Maria decided to interview the customers of Butter on their subscription tool for 3 months and understand how she could co-create a community. She ran a series of 10 workshops over 3 months. They co-created the community guidelines. They voted on the platform that the community would be hosted on, which was Circle. They even declared the values of that community of how they would show up. So what they did really well is they gave their members opportunities to actually have a say in co-creating how the community could look. So you could use co-creation for your investor engagement network by simply just emailing them one-on-one and saying, hey, I'm thinking about this idea. Do you have any feedback? What do you think? Or putting out a vote of, we're launching a new product. We're thinking of naming it. What do you think here? This gives people not only an opportunity to have a say, but feel heard, have actual buy-in. And it's freaking awesome when you see, oh, wow, I actually recommended a feature for Butter and then they launched the AI summaries like the next week. Like, I'm more invested and more likely to now stay with them as a customer and follow them on the journey because I know that they listen to me. A great way to double down on co-creation is looking at member roles. And so a member role is where you understand who are the most engaged people of my community. There's always this top 1% who are just blaring advocates. They really believe in what you're doing. They're always sharing ideas, always sharing feedback. Write down their names. Write them down on a piece of paper, on a digital notepad, and keep an eye on them and understand ways in which you can give them more power, more advocacy, more responsibility and leadership within the community or the investor network that you are building. Great examples of this is looking at music conferences. You know, for people who can't afford to attend the conference, they say, you know what, that's fine. You can become a ticket master and check all the tickets on the gate for 8 hours. And in exchange, we'll give you a free ticket to the event. This is great community building. Humans have been building communities for centuries. And this allows members who are attending this music festival to not only actually have a leadership role, but actually meet new people and connect in that way as well. At the community collective, we have 12 ambassadors who join us for 3 months, twice a year, to basically be the biggest advocates of the community collective. We calculated that ambassadors have generated 5 figures worth of revenue for the community collective just through referrals. They've hosted events in 3 countries in which we couldn't have had access to, and have given us so many ideas of launching new products, but also have built this engaged network of the ambassadors who are now supporting each other as a result. Rite of Passage is a business in America founded by David Perell that helps people find their voice in writing, whether it's newsletters, books, blogs, in that sense. And really, they have launched a 5-week program that runs twice a year as a cohort model. And they now not only provide member roles to previous alumni, they actually hire them. They have hired people from their previous community to now be editors and mentors in that program. Rituals is another tactic to build communities, which is where you basically establish practices that happen on a regular basis. For example, at the Community Collective, before any live, online, or in-person session, we always start with a check-in, which we did at the start of this session. And this is a way for members to regularly understand this is what happens. For example, we celebrate the birthdays of every single member in our community. They get an email on their birthday wishing them a happy birthday from the Community Collective, which is a beautiful way in which we do a ritual that means something and creates a space that only we understand at the CC. Surprise and delight. This is a great community building tactic to breed more connection and affiliation with your brand. Gary Williams at Tractor Ventures does this really well by basically buying a tractor Lego set for any new company that joins the Tractor Village. And so they get this it's not hand delivered by Gaz, but I'm sure that, you know, they get it either in the mail or at an event. And this is such a beautiful and unexpected element that not only connects the founder to the Tractor Village, but also allows them to have a stronger affiliation with the Tractor values and the brand in that sense. Allowing space. All right, we're halfway before we wrap up, and allowing space is a great element for understanding what members of this community or what investors of your network would like to see happen in this space, but knowing that we will try and configure and choose the platform forms and manufacture a space that we think would be useful for members. But just remember that one aspect of serendipity to bear in mind is that you have to be looking for something in order to find something else. So this is pretty profound. What the hell does this mean? Understanding that you might create a space that you think will serve your investors, but actually it might not. So create space within your network for them to share ideas as to what that looks like. So let's get granular for an example on that. So for example, we built a Slack for our cohort program, which is where our community lives online. And we created all these different channels. We were like, you know what, let's create a member meetups channel. Let's create a Nigeria, a program guidance, and we need a resources channel. But my favorite channel is the random channel, in which we created and allowed space for our members to post about whatever the hell they wanted to post about. And then what happened is our members started using this random channel to organize catch-ups with each other. They started saying, you know what, I'm in Sydney next week, who's there? I'm in Brisbane, I've just moved, who's there? And so then that allowed us to create a dedicated channel that was called Member Meetups based on the random channel. And then what happened when we do that? We had so many members from the Community Collective catching up with each other all across Australia. And we had meetups in Nigeria and Lagos because we allowed space through our random channel. And then what happened? They all started sharing photos in that member meetups channel. And then the random channel was flooded with all of these images. So then we created a CC and Snaps member channel for people to share their photos. So we allowed space in the structure that we created within the community to understand what they actually would like and how they want to show up and use this, because we won't have all of the answers. And so a great tactic to then double down on that is this element of teaching them, because if you give a man to fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Letting go of control as a founder can be really hard, but equipping your members or your investors with the tools in which allows them to better support you will be such a game-changing approach. Because if you flip your mindset around, oh, how can I do this alone? How can I help this? How can I build this new product? Instead, thinking, who can help me? Who has done this before? Who can I learn from? And then understanding who can help you execute this. Because if you teach people, investors, how to actually support you, it will help them be more tactical and you will gain more benefit from that. For example, I started a potluck community in Torquay when I moved down here, because I noticed that a lot of women didn't have many friends. Women didn't know each other. There was actually so many incredible people that just didn't have anyone to speak to. And so we created a Facebook Messenger chat. My friend Lucy and I just added a couple of people that we knew. They ended up adding women that they knew. We have over 105 people in this chat. And then we taught all of us how to run a potluck dinner. And so every month we host a potluck dinner, which basically connects women on a monthly basis who live down in the Surf Coast. So how can you teach your investors to not only understand how to share your content, how to give feedback, how to execute new ideas, will allow them to help you even more. Rewards and incentives is an element that kind of doubles down on surprise and delight by actually rewarding the behavior that you want to see in your network. So for example, in our cohort program, we share a community strategy template with every single member, and we get them to submit it at the end of week 5. In cohort 1, we had 0 submissions. No one submitted. We were like, oh, interesting. So we used the tactic of rewards and incentives to see if this would change. And what happened? Cohort 2, we had 9 submissions. Cohort 3, we had 25. In this cohort 4, we're on track to even have more than that, because we not only introduced rewards and incentives, but we said that we would share feedback on every strategy template submitted, as well as post a book gift to anyone that basically submitted. And what ended up happening? Members started sharing photos online of this book from our cohort speaker. This was great brand awareness. This was great incentives because they submitted strategies. And so this element allowed us to double down on building stronger networks, but also increasing the brand awareness in the community. All right, we've made it to the last one before we jump into any Q&A, but this one is element of voting, which we've said throughout this. So how can you ask your investors to actually vote on decisions in the business? An example of who does this really well is One Roof, that is a women's community for female founders or women in leadership. And they basically go out to their community and say, what topics would you like to hear about next year? So everyone votes and submits topics that they'd like to hear about it. Then they go even further and also then ask if any members would like to put themselves forward to host sessions in their programming. This is such an incredible buy-in because now members might want to stay on the next year and stay a part of their community for longer because now they're invested in actually running something. So I'd love for you to reflect or post in the chat, what is your favorite community building tactic? You know, out of all 8 of these, what kind of stood out for you the most? Feel free to post in the chat. If you're at home, kind of share exactly what is coming up for you. We've got one here that says member roles. Yeah, that's totally an element that kind of comes up. We've got a favorite here of rewards, super tactical, very tangible. You could implement that tomorrow as well. So before we dive into Q&A, I'd like to just leave you with this quote, which is, it's not what you know, it's what you do with the people you know. The more that you can involve the members, the investors in your network to actually meaningfully contribute to what you're building, the better. All right, I'm going to pause there. Lay, over to you.
This was so good. I can't believe you're doing this for free. I really appreciate it. Was so packed with content. I'm sure that everybody's feeling the same. I got some questions from the Birchal community, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask those ones. But if you're watching us live, please go ahead and pop your question out, either on the chat, Q&A, whatever you post, I'm gonna find. So let me just open my notes and go to the first question. Paz is my favorite. Most founders that I know would love to have a community, but as we both know, it is a full-time job, and we have a lot of founders that they are one-man band. Where to get started? To kind of dip their toes, see if it's the right move, and then go ahead building the entire community.
Yeah, definitely. We can totally unpack this, Lay. So there's kind of 2 parts to this question. One is, if a founder wanted to build a community for their business, how do you know whether to do that? How do you even do that? How do you have the resources for that? So for that type of question, I'll unpack a 4-step framework. And then the second part of that question that we'll unpack as well is, founders, we don't have a lot of time. We're doing a million things, wearing a million hats at once. If you do want to turn your investor network from an audience model to a community model, you know, what is the first step to not overload? You know, do you need to hire a full-time person to do that? Probably not. So let's unpack that as well. So let's come to the first one of how to determine whether your business should build a community. So the 4 elements that we want to understand first is the business goals, the audience demand, the landscape mapping, and resource allocation. So let's go to business goals first. So if you're going to build a community for your audience or for your customers, like the Community Collective has, like Butter has, like Rite of Passage has, like Birchal has, then you must understand, what is the business trying to achieve this year? In the next 12 months, what are the 3 core goals that you're trying to achieve? What are the 3 metrics that underpin each goal, to understand what are you trying to move the needle on? If you're trying to 10x your revenue, if you're trying to raise a seed round, if you're trying to launch 5 new products, then you must ask, will a community help me accelerate achieving my goals? If not, it's just not for you. It's just not the right time. It could be a timing element, but really understanding, would a community model help me achieve those goals? If my goals are brand awareness, customer impact, customer retention, yes, a community could definitely help you do that. So after understanding, okay, would a community help achieve my business goals? Tick. Let's move to the next stage. Audience demand. Maybe a community would help my business, but does my audience even want to be in a community? Does my subscriber base actually want to help and engage each other? do my investors actually want to jump on a call with other investors and me as a founder and help each other? If there is no demand from the audience or for the investors, it's going to be a bad idea. It's not going to be viable. It's not going to work. Similar to building a business, if there are no customers interested in your product, you won't really have product market fit. So same with community market fit. If there is no audience demand or investor demand, you're going to waste a lot of your time. So just stop there. But if there is, if your investors are like, woohoo, yes, I'm keen, your audience is keen, great. Then we look at landscape mapping. Landscape mapping is, does a similar community already exist? Well, does an investor network for your brand already exist? I hope not. I hope that you're aware of that. You hopefully built that. It'd be pretty cool if there was like an investor network for the community collective happened without me, but I doubt that that's the case. So for building an investor network, that's pretty self-explanatory. But if you're building a public or private community for your business, then understanding, you know what, okay, maybe a community already does exist for facilitators online, so that might not be very helpful. So if, you know, perhaps your audience is already being served in a community somewhere else, then it's not worth building. You could collaborate with that community instead of building your own. But let's say there's a gap in the market, it doesn't exist, then great. We've got green tick on business goals, audience demand, and landscape mapping. Then the last one, which ties into your question, Layla, which is really understanding, okay, resource allocation. Do we have the time, money, energy, and people to build a community? If you're building an investor network, that can be quite simple. So resource allocation can really look in a very different ways. But building a community of 50,000 members for your business requires someone to manage it. There would be applications. You've got to build community guidelines. You've got to understand, is this on a tech tool? Is it online? Is it in person? Are we organizing events? Like, there are elements that go into building a community. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a quick growth marketing hat. It takes time, usually months, 12 months to kind of get to that growth stage of a community. So you need to make sure that you have the time to nurture it, because there's nothing worse than having business goals, having the audience demand, getting everyone signed up, and then just butchering it. So they are the elements to think about. And I've written a blog about all of these to walk people through. So I'll send it
Oh, there'll
to
be
you for
awesome if you
follow-up
can send
email.
around. Yeah, I think
Sure.
this blog post before.
Definitely.
Sorry?
Yeah, definitely. I can share that as well. And the last part for that, Lay, is really understanding, okay, if I do want to build a network, an engaged network for my investor base, what's the resource allocation on that? Well, I'm a founder. I basically turned my advisory board from a passive audience involvement to a community model. And what did that take from me? I sent 5 emails. I sent a calendar invite. We all caught up when we all were bought in, and I've experienced 20 times the amount of value from that call altogether. And there's obviously demand. So you don't have to over-engineer it. Start simple, ask great questions, and then just start with the most obvious answer.
Yeah, I love that you said it. I'm making some notes because I think this is ideal. You don't have to be thinking of the best community that you have around and how it's going to take the focus of the business. You can think about how can you send a more engaging email next? And then from the email, you say, how can I ask more questions? So instead of just reading my email, they're answering, they're engaging with the company, they are giving ideas and building up from there. And I love that you mentioned as well, ask your community. There's no that one strategy that fits everyone. So check with your investors, talk to them and see how they would like to help. And this is a process that we are going through. We're asking both of our community of founders and our community of investors, what would you like to see? How can we support you? How can you support us? Cool. Next question. What are your favorite platforms? You mentioned Butter before, and I absolutely love the UX on that. But what else comes to mind for someone that is starting?
Yeah, platforms, such a topical question.
Yeah.
We get asked about platforms all the time, and it's actually less about my favorite tech tools and more about approach and a mindset that people should take. So I might flip this on its head and share that if you're thinking about where should I host my community, the first one is, okay, is this online or in person? If you're a not-for-profit in Melbourne, like Sisterworks, doing in person is really powerful because obviously everyone's in Melbourne, but that might not be your case. So understanding if it's online or in person. And then there's 2 different approaches that you can take. One is go to where your people are. Go to the platforms that your audience, your members are already using. The second approach is bring everyone to you. You drag them onto the platform, the custom built member platform that you really want to use, that has all the features, and that they are going to, probably a new tool that they haven't used. They'll have to log in, there's a password, and that is basically bringing people to you. If you are launching a new community and you don't have a lot of influence, there's not a big audience demand, go to your people. So I would send out a survey and say, hey, do you like using WhatsApp, Slack, or Telegram? And if they all come back and said, I love WhatsApp, I'd be like, great, that's where I'm going to put the community. But if I'm Taylor Itzinis, one of the world's most famous personal trainers in Australia, I can just build my own app, bring 50,000 women to it overnight because they're going to come to me. I have a lot of influence if I was Taylor Itzinis. And so that is actually how I would think about platforms. And my favorite platforms at the moment are Discourse, which is a great online forum for a lot of content. Big companies use them. And then I love Disco for running cohort-based programs, disco.co.
It is quite a good platform. Again, going back to the community and asking them what they like. I thought that I knew everything that founders liked and what they needed. I don't. I asked them if they like to have more in-person events or webinars like this. And I thought they would be saturated of it and saying like, you know what, no, we have enough Founders Connect and stuff. And they all, 100% of them said, I would like to meet with more founders and kind of share our learnings along the way. So that was interesting to see. Last questions before we finish off. And this is a really good one, Paz. As you know, startups are cyclical. They fluctuate with the market. So sometimes founders don't know how to give the bad news to investors, especially if it's a public forum, not a public, but you have your community that other investors can see as well. So how would you handle that? Do you think they should be addressing these problems in either way, or you think they should pretend the problems are not there?
Yeah, definitely just pretend problems aren't there for sure. They'll just disappear. No.
Nobody's going
You know, one of the values that we have at the Community Collective is transparency is our default. Sharing the wins, addressing problems is really important. And so obviously each situation is going to be different. There's going to be different contingency plans for each situation. So it really is a case-by-case basis. But if you just remember that transparency and being truthful, and when you don't know what to do the right thing is a great element to come back to. That's probably my quick advice before we have to wrap up.
Yeah, that sounds great. Paz, again, thank you so much for your time. This was crazy valuable. I'm definitely going to add that to our YouTube as well. So if you want to add the recording, just keep an eye either on LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel, on Birchal. And thank you again. This was great.
Thank you so much, everyone. And bye, Layla.
Bye.